Welcome to this episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Jack O'Halloran. A lot of people know him from Superman, King Kong, Dragnet, but there's something about Jack you might not know. He is the son of Albert Anastasia.
Well, I wasn't a happy puppy, that's for sure. I didn't realize I was just beginning to understand that world, and then I was taken under wing by Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello, and a lot of things were explained to me. And the more I learned, and the more I saw, and the more I saw that nobody was doing anything about it. That the law wasn't doing anything about it, and nobody from the street was doing anything about it, and that kind of upset me quite a bit. And they told me that I should just leave it alone, but I just couldn't do that. So,
What was the reason they said your father was killed?
he died because he wouldn't accept the drug business, and he controlled the harbors. And he said, "You're not bringing that stuff in on my watch." He just wasn't. And the Anastasia family was a powerful family. After they assassinated him, Carl Gambino was his underboss, and it became the Gambino family, and which is one of the most powerful families in the five families. So, it was Albert, but they made a very bad mistake, and they realized it after it was done, because he was the glue that held everything together. From Murder Inc. and the fear that was instilled in people. And we're talking about all people in the families, and not innocent people walking around, but people who were involved in all the business that the families were involved in.
He kept people in line, right? He kept them in line. He kept them in line.
Yeah, they were the policemen, for all the family business. And it worked for a long time. It worked very well, but once he was gone, everybody started who shot John, and they started killing each other, and foolishly greed. Greed's an amazing thing, and they all got involved in this. They thought there was such easy money in the drug business, and it was such an easy thing. They forgot how to make money. They had systems set out where they did very well. They controlled the waterfronts, they controlled a lot of things, and there was a lot of revenue stream that just went by the wayside because they got more interested in drugs and prostitution. It was very stupid.
What about when there was an attempt on Frank Costello's life? Do you remember when that happened?
They tried to kill Frank. The Chin tried to kill Frank because he held the most powerful political book and connections. And he sat them down and he said, we're going to lose all these connections if you don't put this drug business aside, because they tolerate a lot of things that we do because we help each other out, but they're not going to tolerate this drug business. And the sad part is that the government was more involved in it than anybody else. So,
do you think that drugs really destroyed the mob and that life?
Oh yeah, I think it changed it. It didn't totally destroy it, but it certainly changed it. And there's people who were seriously involved in a lot of things became legitimate in a lot of ways. I mean, they still had their connections and ways of doing things, but in a way they became legitimate, because they ran businesses and knew that there's things you had to walk away from, because when they put the certain laws in, that were just really not even for them, but they used it against them for conspiracy deals and stuff like that. They just would throw your name in a pot and say, well, and I knew a lot of guys that stood up and wouldn't talk and wouldn't say this and wouldn't say that, and they wound up doing 30, 40 years in jail because they would never talk.
Like Genovese did, right? He went to prison for a long time for drugs.
Genovese deserved to die. He deserved to go to prison. I mean, he was the pit of the problem. He was in the 30s when he was deported. He went to Sicily and he put a plant in down there where they were distributing heroin from. And in fact, the old timers were so against it that the people that were working for him and bringing stuff into America were not allowed to be called Italians. They were called Zips. That was the name that they had. They were Zips.
Yeah.
And it was, something had to be done to cease it. And something had to be done to, Genovese had to stay in jail until he died, and which is what happened.
So you guys were giving protection to people on the boardwalk. How old were you around that time?
Well, I was about 15, 16 years old, 17. Every summer we increased our business. It was pretty good. And we took care of business very well. We didn't shake anybody down or anything. We really stopped people from stealing from people and for disturbing their businesses.
Oh, so if people would like break windows or something, you guys would stop
Well,
them?
they would shoplift and they would interfere with. There was a lot of stalls on the boardwalk, shooting galleries and pitch things, and there was all kinds of things that people were trying to manipulate them and shake them down and stuff. And, so we put an end to a lot of that.
Yeah. So did you want to be an actor back then?
It worked out pretty well. It was a revenue stream.
Did you have acting?
Never thought about it.
No.
I liked the film business. I like films. I studied films a lot. I liked looking, watching films and watching actors and certain people. And I don't know. It was like in my subconscious. I never thought about doing it myself.
Yeah.
But it gave me a way of putting a persona across. I would watch certain films like Edward G. Robinson and all, and it gave me a way of handling things that I did in the street, which was kind of cool,
Yeah.
But everything in life is a learning edge. You learn from wherever. And I was very fortunate to have people like Lansky and them around me that I learned from the best. Meyer Lansky was one of the smartest men I ever met.
They steer you in the right direction, right?
Pardon?
They steer you in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, they taught me how to stay out of jail. They taught me a lot of things that were very important, and it worked very well. And I listened to them very well. I had a lot of respect for them. I like Frank. Frank was a very smart man, and so was Meyer. And then I got involved friendly with Raymond Patriarca and some other people, and I went across the country actually, and I met everybody. They sent me across the country to meet people. Just if I was in Detroit, or if I was in Chicago, or if I was in some places, I had people that I could talk to, and people that I could relate to. And if I had any problems there, I had people that would sort it out.
Like Jimmy Hoffa was one of them, right?
Jimmy was a good friend. I like Jimmy. Jimmy was a man's man. Jimmy Hoffa would never ask you to do what he couldn't do himself, and he did a tremendous amount. Stop and think what he actually did. Before Hoffa, if you were a truck driver, you were working like 18, 20 hours a day. You were loading a truck, unloading a truck, driving it. You were doing all the work and getting paid very little. And he put a stop to that. And it got to where all they did was drive trucks. They didn't unload them. They didn't load them. They just drove them from one place to another. And other people did the unloading and the loading. And it was all involved. And he put the Teamsters together very well, And it was, there were lawyers and businessmen who quit business office jobs just to be outside driving a truck in the open air.
Wow.
Because all they had to do was drive. It was a great way of life, and they made a lot of money. They got paid very well just for driving a truck cross country. You know what I'm saying?
Do you remember that? That was around the 60s, right? Around the 60s?
Yeah, the 50s and the 60s. And Hoffa put the pension fund together. They helped build Las Vegas. They helped a lot of things. They helped a lot of people, and what they put him away for was ludicrous. To say that he stole $8,000 from the pension fund to fix his house is the stupidest thing I ever heard, because if Jimmy had a problem in his house, there were people that would want to fix it for nothing.
Yeah.
But they loved him. You know, he was very well respected and loved. You know, and I remember when the day he went away to Lewisburg, all the Teamsters lined their trucks up all the way up to Lewisburg, honking their horns as he went by in adulation to him. The country came to a standstill that day because no freight moved. All these guys just lined up and saying goodbye to him because he was going to jail. And, you know, and some people thought he shouldn't have went. And he said, well, if I did the crime, I'll do the time. And, you know, and he didn't think that he would be there but a couple months and they would sort it out. But he wound up being there a few years because he backed the wrong president, you know, and the Kennedys didn't want him on the street because he controlled too much vote. You know,
And
Teamsters were huge.
they were trying to keep
controlled a
him
lot of
out of
vote.
it, right? They were trying to keep him away from it, and he
They
wanted
wanted to keep him away
back
from
in.
it because he was a man's. Jimmy was very revered by people. He was a man's man. He was a good person. I like Jimmy a lot.
Do you remember when he went missing?
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Jimmy was his own worst enemy. He caused his own problem. He got when he came home from jail, he signed a very bad agreement to get out of jail, and which meant he couldn't touch the Teamsters. He couldn't go near it. He wasn't allowed to go there, or wasn't allowed in the office. And he walked right in his office and he told, "Get out of my chair, boy. You know, this is my union. I'm taking it back." And they said, "Jimmy, you signed an agreement. You can't. You're going to get us in trouble." He said, "Get out of my office." And he got a phone call from New York, and he got into an argument over the phone. And you know, they said, "Jimmy, just give it a little bit of time. We'll sort it out. Everything will work out fine." He said, "I don't want to hear that. I want my union back. I want it back now. It's mine. And I don't like what you're doing with it." And he didn't. They just were. There was too much influence, the government and the union now, and he didn't like where it was going. So he wanted to take it back, and he got in the argument with the guy over the phone, and he said, "You know, when you people wanted money for Vegas, we gave it to you, but they paid every one of those loans back, you know, and they lent the money for Caesar's Palace. That came out of the pension fund."
Yeah, a lot of people had their hands in the pension, right?
Well, they did after he went to jail. Then it got Fitzsimmons was really. They scared Fitzsimmons to death. They blew up his son's car, and they scared him to death. And they took control of a lot of things that Jimmy would never allow to happen. And so on the phone call, he started arguing back and forth. And they said, "Jimmy, please, you're on the phone. Just give it some time, and we'll sort it out." And he said, "You know, the hell with this. I'll go to the press." And then the guy just hung the phone up. And that was the end of Jimmy Hoffa.
Wow. So
it was very sad.
It is, because I could tell he seemed like a great guy from what I could tell.
He was an incredible guy. He was an incredible individual, and he did a lot for the working man of the country. They should never ever forget that. He took them from one place and put them into a very good position. You know, Teamster guys make a lot of money and they do well. That's all because of Hoffa.
Yeah,
if you're a Teamster driver on a film and you drive from one side of the city to the other, you're getting paid tremendous money just to drive across the street, pick something up, and bring it back. You know, it's sad. It was a turn. It's like another turning of events, you know, of the country. It was another thing that turned things around in not a good way.
Yeah, just like the Kennedy assassination and all that stuff. You do remember when that happened?
Jack Kennedy was, I like Jack Kennedy, but his father was the problem. His father fell into control of Chicago back in Prohibition era. And nobody ever talks about this. You know, Joe Kennedy was a very, very bright guy. And I mean, he was a smart man. In fact, he was the youngest head of a president of a bank in the history of banking. He was married to Rose Fitzgerald, who was Honey Fitzgerald was a gangster from Ireland who came to America and did very well. He owned the Bank of England. He became a senator. He was a very strong political guy, and he dug out the Boston Harbor. He made it much more lucrative. And Joe Kennedy married him. He put him ahead of a bank. And then Prohibition came in, but he also controlled all the liquor coming out of Scotland and everything. So when Prohibition happened, Joe Kennedy and a guy from Newark, New Jersey that owned Fleischmann's Liquor went up to Canada, and they had a warehouse. And they were taking the booze up to Canada, and then they were bringing it back into America, bootlegging it. And there was a load of booze that was assigned to some people called the Purple Gang. We're a very strong group out of Detroit. And Joe Kennedy found a better buyer and swiped the load and sold it to the other guys. And the Purple Gang were very annoyed. And they said to him, "You're a dead man, Sunshine." And he ran home to Honey Fitzgerald, and he said, I can't help you with this matter.